So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us at the STOA. So this is, as you can tell, this is our first time figuring out how to Twitch stream because supposedly we're technology entrepreneurs that have never used Twitch. Actually, that's just me. I am a complete hermit when it comes to social media and streaming platforms. So bear with us. But anyways, long story short, welcome to At the STOA. Essentially, this is a talk series that we've just kicked off to bring in interesting people and just hear the raw stories. Usually, you hear fireside chats and pitches and sort of more one-sided conversations. And that's great for high-level inspiration, but nobody ever gets to the depth of, the one-on-one conversations, what's worked, what hasn't worked, that you have when you're an entrepreneur talking to another entrepreneur. And that's what we kind of want to bring out rather than a 20, 30-minute chat. We're going to be chatting for the next hour and a half, and just sharing about each of our experiences. And it especially helps when you have someone like Stacey, who I've known for, a long time now.
Yeah.
Like 5 to 6 years, actually longer. So I've no better person in the world to be kicking this off with than Stacey. I won't do it justice by introducing her. So I'll let her introduce herself in a minute here. But I just want to thank the people who put all this together, especially Grace from my team, as well as with the backing of Ryerson University and Innovation Boost Zone. So if you are in Toronto, Innovation Boost Zone is a deep tech incubator where we help essentially entrepreneurs build great companies. We provide combination of funding sources, other mentors, advisors, EIRs, basically everything that you'll need at the early stage when there's chaos with respect to your idea, and help shift that focus so you can build a great company. So anyways, that's the first and hopefully the last plug I make. But yeah, without further ado, I kind of just want to jump into it. So as a background, I haven't caught up. I've been meaning to catch up with Stacey for months and months, years and years, but I don't think we've caught up in the last year anytime during COVID. So this is kind of like the perfect segue. So Stacey, tell us who you are, where do you come from, and what have you been up to lately?
Yeah, so I'll give a quick abbreviated background. So I am a technology entrepreneur, as you mentioned earlier. I have built and sold 2 technology companies and had the opportunity to work with some incredible people throughout those times, founding and building those businesses. So the first business I started actually right out of high school, started it with two other co-founders, and we were building basically an internet security business that was focused, our primary product, on building single sign-on technology back in 2011. I'm sure we can get into all this, but built that company from basically nothing. And then over the course of a few years, built it and then sold it to reputation.com in the San Francisco Bay Area. A lot of people know that company or my story with that company because we were able to raise about $1.2 million, so 1.2 million from a tweet out to Richard Branson. And he and 2 of his buddies ended up putting in capital for us to start that business when I was 18. And then after selling that first business, I worked at reputation.com for a while, leading our marketing initiatives, doing both digital advertising, physical advertising, and everything in between, and eventually dabbling some in PR as well. And then I decided to go to college at New York University for a year, did that. While I was there, published a book with a good friend of mine named Jared Kleinert. And the book was all about young people doing awesome entrepreneurial things. Was really lucky to partner with a publishing house that was able to get that book up to some #1 levels online, which was cool. And then after that, started a workforce management company and built that company over the course of 5 years, co-founded it with Elon Musk's wife, Tallulah Riley, and then 2 other folks from my previous business. So the 4 of us started that company, built and grew that over 5 years, and then just sold it right before the pandemic to a Canadian-based workforce management company called Workjam. And then most recently, I led global business development and revenue operations for Workjam, managing teams across the Americas, EMEA, and Asia Pacific. And then I recently made the transition over to a company that's been in the news because of Reddit called GameStop. And now I'm leading new formats at GameStop, thinking about what the future of our stores look like. So that's like the very abbreviated version. As you know, Harry, lots of ups and downs in companies and everything in between. I feel like I'm young, but I've been through a lot. I won't say I've been through it all, because every time you say that, something else happens, and then you're like, oh, this is new. But I've been fortunate to see a lot of things over the short career that I've had. That seems like a pretty long career actually so far, but it's actually short. So
yeah, you've done a lot for what, 29? You're 29 now.
Yeah.
Am I not supposed to say that on stream?
Thanks for aging me. I really appreciate it.
Well, we're the same age, so I thought I would ask.
We are, but you're farther along. You recently got married, and like you're doing all these other cool things that.
Oh yeah,
I want to hear all
we
about
should talk about that. We should talk about that. Just like balancing personal life and the changes that come with, spending your time emotionally. My wife is probably watching this. Hey, wifey. Hey, hero. So, okay. One of the things that comes to mind, we were at one of these entrepreneurship dinners at one point.
Yeah.
And it was like a buffet. It was kind of like a buffet style where we had to get up and get our own food. And like you were sitting beside me, like we were seated together. I'd gone up to get food. And a bunch of founders that were there, like we're pointing at you and we're like, oh my God, that's Stacey. Like she's this big shot. And she has a Wikipedia page and everything. You weren't there. Like they were just saying this on the side, like pointing at you. And like completely flabbergasted by like all the things you've done. And I like, oh my God, I can't believe that Stacey's in the same room as me right now. It was I think it was one of the events in LA. And I was like, hey, I just talked to her. She's a really great person. And you should just talk to her. And I remember sitting back down and saying this to you, like, hey, those people really want to talk to you. And they think you're really cool because you have a Wikipedia page. And you kind of went, that means nothing. Like, it's much more about the execution. So like, you obviously hold this massive brand value to the external world. And knowing how I know you, personally, I see maybe not the dichotomy, but also a different side of like the hard work you've put in, the roller coaster, as you said, of like building companies. Like, how do you deal with that dichotomy?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really great question, but you said it earlier, like there are people that'll look at all the accolades. They'll look at, oh, and you get this too, right? Oh, Teal Fellow, Forbes 30 under 30, has a Wikipedia page. But like you said, it's like those things don't matter as much as the work that you're actually putting out in the world. And I think that's the thing for me that always, the reason why I think I'm drawn to entrepreneurship, or the reason why I'm drawn to executing on new ideas, is because I'm genuinely interested in what can we do to change the world to make it better? What can we learn through that process about ourselves, about the company, about the idea, about the people that we're doing it with? And then from those learnings, how can we circle back full circle to our vision for what we wanted the future to look like, and make sure that we're designing that and creating that responsibly? And that's what this whole like entrepreneurial enterprise for me has always been about. It's about having a vision for the way I think the world should be. Now we can argue if my vision is right or wrong, but I'd like to think I have an opinion of where I want the future to go. And then I'm not afraid to go build towards that. and forget about the accolades, because it's not about, it's not about that. It's about what are we doing to make the world a better place to live in for you and me and our friends and our family and people that are in other countries and continents and other places as well. And I think that kind of keeping that in the back of my head is something that I've always valued. Like, I think I might have told you this at one point. My dad, I remember when I sold my first company, I was 20 years old. And for me, I was like, wow, that's a huge accomplishment. Like, I'm 20 years old. I've sold a technology company. Admittedly, I was probably a little like egotistical and cocky and being like, I'm doing great. And I remember the first thing that my dad said to me, it wasn't congratulations. It wasn't like a big pat on the back. It was, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I kind of forget exactly what he said, but something to the effect of like, you're only as good as the last thing that you do. So you better make the next one count as well. And that was a good, like, humbling moment for me, where I was kind of like, everyone else in the world is congratulating me. It felt like, and here my dad is being like, you need to be thinking about what the next thing is and make it just as good, if not better. And that's something that has always stuck with me. Now 9 years later, obviously I'm still talking about it as like, yeah, it's only like, you're only as good as the last thing that you did. And so keep one-upping yourself and keep challenging yourself to do better. So yeah, that's kind of my philosophy on it.
See, I feel like I have the opposite problem.
Okay, tell me.
Like, so one of my mentors told me, like, so when I was working on Medela, like, obviously we went through our ups and downs, but it was always like, like we got our first, check, and that was a great moment. Or when we got our first customer, and that was a great moment. Or when we hired somebody really awesome, and that was a great moment. Like, we had all these wins along the way. And by the way, I don't think like fundraising should be celebrated. We can come back to that.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people do. But we definitely had a bunch of wins, and it always felt like no win was good enough. And as a result, we celebrated very little. Like, one time, I think I still have this, like, one of our investors sent this like super fancy champagne for something we had done. This is the crazy thing, I don't even remember. And to this day, it's unopened. Like, it's probably sitting in one of my closet, in like a closet somewhere. And I've always felt like I have this like ongoing imposter syndrome where it's like, I've never accomplished enough. So I feel like I'm my like I'm humble when it comes to me, and I actually find it, maybe it's a Canadian thing. Maybe I find it hard to talk big about myself. And I'm always like, oh my God, I feel like I should do more.
But do you think that that's also, because I understand what you're saying, part of me wonders if it's also a product of age. Like, do you think that you were always that way? Or do you think that that's something that the older you've gotten? Because I feel like for myself too, like the older I've gotten, the more kind of humbled I would say I've become.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is just like, when you're young, you don't know what you don't know. And so you kind of think, at least I'm going to speak for my own, like, you have an early success and you're like, wow, this is great. And then the older you get, I remember like going into company number 2, I was like questioning everything. I was like, well, I don't know if I can do that again. Like, I don't know if that was a fluke. I don't know if I'm cut out to do this. And then the questions started coming, being like, okay, now I know that there's a lot of other people out there that are a lot smarter than me about a lot of different things. And so I feel like the older I get, the more people I meet, the more I realize I don't know, the more humbled I've become.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Like, I've been humbled a lot of times, and then especially when you win a bunch of awards and accolades, like, and especially when you're young, it gets to your head because you make that your identity, especially when you're a teenager and you get that type of success.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. That's all I do. And like, I was reading this thing about Adam Grant, I don't know, few days ago. Like, we should stop asking kids who do you want to be when you grow up? Instead, we should ask, like, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Because then it's not a matter of identity. It's about like the problems you end up solving or the missions you end up taking on.
Yeah. I love that. That's something, I do a lot of public speaking. And that's like one of the things I speak about, which is like, yeah, it's don't ask your kids what do you want to be when you grow up. Ask your kids, what do you want to experiment with and learn over the course of your lifetime? And I think that's a more powerful like question, because it gives you the freedom to say, and like, let's talk about this too, right? Like in college, people are like, oh, you have to major in one thing. And you see all these people in high school being like, what do you mean? Like, how am I going to pick one thing? I'm interested in like 50 different things.
Right.
And I think that's such a false narrative of like, you have to pick one thing and be good at it and do that the rest of your life. And the real narrative is like, no, you can like try 10 different things, 12 different things, 500 different things in your lifetime. You just have to be willing to like reinvent yourself and learn and continue to improve every single day if you want to do that. And how many cycles you get is up to you, and how quickly you can learn and like how quickly you want to move. But
I think school is a little worse than that. And I don't want to go down this path too much, just because we've already talked a lot about it. And I think the narrative is pretty solid on this, but tests especially do students a disservice. Because like, I remember when I got my test back, it was never about like, hey, how do I improve the mistakes that I made on my test? It was like, okay, I got this mark, especially if it's like an exam at the end of a course or whatever. It's like, okay, I got this mark. I can't really do anything about it. Let me just flush all this knowledge that I gained down the drain. Whereas entrepreneurship or just real life in general is the exact opposite. It's about really scrutinizing your mistakes and then like learning from it every single time.
Yeah. It's like building a house. It's like you have to lay the foundation and then continue to build on top of it. So yeah. It's interesting.
That was okay. We went on a massive tangent. So
yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. This is how I'm glad we're going on these tangents. So being humble, I think on the point of like being humbled, I think there's two things, like, or at least this is what it was like for me. Like when I was starting Medela, I was super naive. I was like, I'm going to build this product. I'm going to get I'm going to go through like, regulations. I'm going to get customers and, it's going to be awesome. Like, why won't people get behind this? Why won't people buy what I have to build? And obviously it's not that easy, but I'm not sure if it was without that naivety. And if I knew all the hard work I needed to do beforehand, I would have started a company given what I knew back then. So it's like the unknown unknowns almost like gave me this like arrogance, if you will, to like, yeah, I can do this crazy thing. And then now I feel like, and I think this is true for you too. And I'm curious what you think about this. You ended up, or like now I'm at a point in my life where it's like, I'm going to take on this massive challenge. I know I'll probably fail a bunch of times, and I'm pretty good at assessing how hard this is going to be and all the failure points. And yet I have the confidence or arrogance or some combination of both to take it on. Like, do you feel that way? Or does that feel different to you?
Yeah, I think I do. Like the way that I would describe it is there's almost these points where you're naive enough to say, yes, I'm going to move forward and do this thing, like start this company. And then like from a confidence level, you start here. And then it goes like, it drops. And that's where like your imposter syndrome comes in, where you're like, what did I get myself into? I have no idea what I'm doing. And then at some point, like you said, all those little small wins, like you start to get more confidence again. And then it starts to build back up. And then you like hit another plateau in your business and it drops back down again. And like for yourself I guess for myself as an entrepreneur, it's how do I pick myself back up from a confidence level when I get down there? Because as you know, like half the game when it comes to like getting new customers or even hiring people or raising money or any of these things, like half of that is a confidence level thing, where if you can just have high confidence in yourself and what you're doing, you'll win some amount of deals or new hires or raise money or whatever it is, just because of the confidence that you have. And a lot of being a founder for me has been learning how to manage my emotions through those processes, through the ups and downs. Yeah. And like you said, like entrepreneurship is about losing a lot of battles, but then winning the war. And like, that's ultimately, I think, the thing to keep in mind as a founder. And like, even when you have teams who lose the battle, like how do you keep them marching towards the next battle so that you can win the war?
Yeah, this is a good transition into what I wanted to ask you next. But Grace, are there, I know I've been neglecting chat. If there's anything in the chat, Grace, or any questions that come up, please bring them up. And yeah, we'll see what we say. So you've obviously had a lot of emotional roller coasters, as any entrepreneur does. Like, what do you do? Because being a CEO is extremely lonely. How do you deal with that?
It's tough. I would say.
Yeah, I'm asking all the tough questions.
I know, right? I think it's like finding ways to figure out how to refresh. And trust me, like when I first started, probably around the time that we first met, I was terrible at this. Like I was like really bad at managing my own emotional state, really bad at managing myself personally. And I got completely consumed in work. And I would say probably the first 6 years of my career, it was only work. In fact, I dated people who would break up with me because I just worked way too much.
I did not know that about you, actually. I had no idea. You know what? When I first met you, I had no idea about your dating life.
Because I basically like made it non-existent.
Yeah. And all we talked about was work at one point.
Yeah. Because that's just how I was. Like I defaulted to work 100% of the time. And over time, I've gotten a lot better at balance. A lot of that has been people that I've surrounded myself with, reminding me that balance is important, and then finding ways to really refresh. And so for me, it's like going on a run, or I have a dog now, like taking my dog to the dog park, or just like hopping in the shower. Like I think the best ideas happen when you're in the shower. So if ever I'm feeling overwhelmed or anxious or just like this is too much, I'll either go on a run, I'll take my dog to the dog park, I'll hop in the shower, I'll call a friend, like anything that just gets my mind to do like a 180 and think about something else. And that takes a lot of self-awareness, which I didn't have early on in my career.
Okay. So are you preventative about this stuff? So do you know, like, can you sense when you're getting burnt out? I think there's two types of burnouts. And I'm happy to refine my word. Maybe burnout is not even the right word. But one form of burnout is like, it's short term. It's like, I'm just getting tired. I'm not coming up with new ideas and I'm not being productive with my time just for the next few hours. Mm-hmm. Then the second version of it is like, you're overworked. And this is the more traditional definition of burnout, where it's like, you lose this feeling or drive of doing stuff. And that especially matters because entrepreneurship is so self-initiative driven. Mm-hmm. First of all, do you differentiate those types of burnouts? And then like, how do you think about, like, how preventative are you about these things?
Yeah. So I would say for me, and I think it's different for everyone, like motivation is not something that I feel like I really lack. And I'm grateful for that, because sometimes I'll talk to people and they're like, I just don't know how you motivate yourself. Like, I don't feel motivated to like do my own thing. And I've never really felt like that. I think I have the opposite problem of like, I'm so motivated to work on something that I will work 100% of the time and like not even sleep sometimes just to be working on something that I deem as valuable to myself or potentially, hopefully, to other people. So the motivation one, not so much. The burnout in terms of not understanding, not thinking clearly enough on how to prioritize time is the one that I think I struggle the most with, where because I feel like I'm a workaholic.
Hang on. Before we go to the second, I'm so surprised that you're saying the first thing. And I'll play devil's advocate.
Yeah, go for it.
If you're always motivated, like, what's wrong with that? Doing more work isn't bad per se.
Right. What's wrong with it? I'll tell you what's wrong with it. Well, I think it's also the way that I do it. So I was reading this really interesting blog post the other day about this guy who was talking about amateur poetry. And he was basically talking about like in today's society, we don't value amateur poets because anything that someone does that's not like economically valuable or not making money is like not worth doing. And that's something that I struggle with a lot, which is when I say I'm motivated to do things with a financial return. And I think I need to pare that back a little bit, where it's, hey, you can be motivated to do that stuff, but you also need to leave time just to like explore and discover and be an amateur poet and like not care that it's not going to have a financial return associated with it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I think that's where that is bad. That's like motivation in one particular direction to a fault. Like it's motivation towards a financial outcome to a fault. And I'll admit that. And I understand I struggle with that. And that's where I think that can be detrimental, because I do think as an entrepreneur, you're only as good as the content you're consuming, the people you're talking to, the things that you're allowing in your atmosphere that inform the decisions that you make in the way that you think. And if you're not willing to put anything into your brain that doesn't relate to some sort of economic financial outcome, that's dangerous. And that makes you not as creative, not as, in my opinion, valuable as an entrepreneur. And so that's something that I always try and like remind myself.
But there's operators, again, I agree with you, but just to play devil's advocate, because I'm not 100% there yet. Mm-hmm. There's operators that are super valuable if they think like that. Is it more like I don't want to be that person? Like,
correct. I think as a founder, CEO, having a breadth of knowledge is more important. Like maybe having I always say, I want my knowledge to be like pie shaped, right? I want it to be like, I have a breadth and then I can go deep on like two things.
Right. Yeah. I call this like sticks versus tea. So it's like a stick is super narrow and you know something really, really well, like, RF tech. But then a T, and I think good CEOs and engineers who become CEOs are really good T's, which is like they know a bit of everything. Like they know how to do HR, they know how to raise money, or they know how to manage people, so on and so forth.
Completely agreed. And I think that's important. So to your point, like, I don't think that it's bad necessarily to be that way if you're solely wanting to be an operator. But as a CEO, as a founder, I think it's important to have that breadth of knowledge.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. Okay. So that deals with the first type of burnout. You're saying you're struggling with the second type of burnout.
Yeah. So second type of burnout for me is like sometimes I'll just spin my wheels, meaning I'll work on things that are not the most valuable use of my time. And I notice it when I'm just like start doing the easiest things rather than the top things on my priority list. And then I always sit back and I'm like, okay, why am I doing this thing that's like super easy that someone else could do, or that like is not a top priority? And I'm just doing it because I don't know, because I'm like tired of doing the hard stuff. And then that's when I'm like, all right, pump the brakes. Why am I tired of doing the hard stuff?
Is it like, I don't know, it's probably some combination of just not thinking clearly, as you state.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's even like, and maybe this is unpopular or controversial, but sometimes it's like laziness and fear too. I don't think the laziness thing, but more like the fear thing. Like, if I tackle this problem and it's going to uncover some stuff, sometimes it's just easier to, like, okay, I just want to ignore that problem and focus on the things that are great. Like, and I see like sales, I think, is like a great example where it's like, let me just focus on my quarter return, like the numbers I need to hit for this quarter. Mm-hmm. And I'll upsell now at the sacrifice of long-term sales.
Building pipeline. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that too. Like some element of it being fear of the unknown, or just fear of like more stuff's going to get added to the plate, right? Like if I tackle the hard stuff, more hard stuff is going to be put on the plate. And then what does that mean?
Right.
And yeah, it's interesting. It's probably a combination of both.
Yeah. But I think you've always been really good at taking the big stuff on. Like, you were, every time I've talked to you about the hard problems, you were only in a temporary phase, like phase as in like you were in the haze, like moment of haze.
If I'm not burnt out. Yeah. But that's how I know. Like if I'm burnt out, then I'm like, it's hard for me to like tackle the hard stuff. And that's where I'm like, all right, this is why I need to go for a run or do something, because I know I'm burning out. Because you're right. Like my natural inclination is to do the hard stuff. I like doing that. It's a challenge.
You're right. Yeah. So I think Mawada from chat was asking, how do you recover from burnout? And we kind of just answered that, or at least you answered that. I'll give you, Mawada, my version of the answer, which is, so in the first version of burnout, where I'm just being temporarily unproductive, or I'm in that haze, as Stacey's talking about, I love meditation. I've been doing it for over a decade now. On and off, but generally speaking, I'm pretty consistent. And to me, just clearing my head and just focusing on one thing at one time, that is not work, that is not a relation, like that has nothing to do with anything. It's kind of like a break from the world, is really good for me.
How do you meditate? Like, sorry, before you move on, like what tools do you use to meditate, and how long do you meditate for?
Oh, what a tech entrepreneur question. What tools do you use? So I'm old school. I do not use any tools. I literally sit there, like I'm super old school. I literally sit there. And so, okay, I can give you like this, like meditation 101 as represented by Harry. So when I first started, I didn't even know it was called meditation, or I didn't know it was a thing. I just like doing it. So I just wake up at like this, since I wasn't a kid, I would just wake up and I would just sit and think about stuff. And that was really good. And it'd clear my thoughts. And sometimes I wouldn't even be thinking about anything meaningful. It would just be like looking out at nature and just like seeing the leaves, like, be rustling in the wind or what have you. But I never thought of it as meditation. And then I remember this time, I think it was grade 10, I was skipping class, but as being the nerdy Harry that I was, I went to the library. Like I would skip class to go to the library. And I came across this book about meditation, and it was a very systematic way of meditating. And that's where I learned like real meditation. There's no such thing as real. Everyone has their own journey, I think, when it comes to meditation, and there's techniques. But that book essentially showed me like, okay, just focus on your breathing, and just focus on like being in the present moment. And then like start thinking through each of your body parts and each of your like muscles, like things you wouldn't normally pay attention to. But it wasn't guided or anything. Like I was just like reading about this and applying this. And just to do that one part, it took me like 6 months. I couldn't stop the thoughts from coming into my head. Like as soon as I would like focus on my breathing, it's like, oh, when am I going to have a breakfast? Or I need to go talk to this person. Or, oh my God, that squirrel is like climbing that tree, or whatever. It could be little things. But once I got over it, and that was the hardest part. And this is, I think, where most people give up on meditation because they're like, oh my God, I'm too crazy. My brain's all over the place. But if you're able to power through that, and then you get to the stillness, that's where meditation gets really interesting, where you like bring in individual thoughts. So like I'll think of like memory, like why do I feel guilt, or why do I feel anger in this moment, or what have you? And I could trace that back to like, I know, something that I experienced and like rationalize what went through my brain. So I went through this like 3-4 year journey of just like thinking back through my memories of like what made me me. And some of it was very like things that I'm not really proud of. Like I was a really angry kid growing up, for example, but just like coming to terms with that and then changing that about myself. So
I didn't know that. Not to take you off on a tangent, but we'll dive into that deeper too.
Yeah. I'm happy to. Like, yeah, it was a pretty, like if I met 9-year-old version of me, I would hate me.
Really? Why?
100%.
Why do you say that? What was 9-year-old Harry like?
Oh, like I don't know, I got angry at stupid things. Like I got angry at things that were clearly outside my control and that I should not have cared for. And yet I did. And
what's
like
an example of that?
Oh, like, okay, we don't even have to go to 9-year-old Harry. This was like 8-year-old Harry. So I grew up in India, as you know, and every year, like there'd be like 60 people in one class, right? So it was the first day of school, and there's this new kid that came, and he didn't know anybody else. And the way it would work is wherever you sat on the first day is where you kind of sat for the entire year, basically.
Okay.
And I had my spot like chosen, but this guy got there first and he sat in my spot. Okay. And just over that, like I got into a fight with him. I'm like, hey, I told him to move. He didn't listen. And then I'm like, okay, we need to go outside. And we did. And he was just like, I think he just thought I wanted to chat with him. But no, I actually like got into a fight with this person, and like just over like, because he sat in a spot that I thought he shouldn't sit in. Not my proudest of moments, but like that's the type of like stupid Harry was at one point.
Got it.
Sorry if this person is listening. I'm so sorry that I did this to you.
Tell me about your founder issues.
Oh my God. It's been fascinating. So my founder issues, I mean, similar sentiment, have all come from poor communication. Mm-hmm. And poor expectation management, I should say. Mm-hmm. Like, it's funny. I think it's like a long-term relationship. It's kind of like dating. Like founders are essentially your spouses in some sense. And you kind of have to work out all the same issues, talk constantly, get on the same page, because you're going wherever you're going together. Mm-hmm. And I can't get into some of this stuff, but like at the highest level, a lot of the things that you said about employees is doubly true for founders. So whenever I had founder issues, I should have resolved it sooner so I didn't build that resentment. And B, if I saw them waver in their mission driven, I probably should have like turned it around and like figured out a way out sooner rather than, wait it out or trying to make it work for long periods of time. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know what that balance is, because like in most relationships, you kind of have this tendency to just like work things out. Like you kind of have to take people in on faith. To some extent. Obviously, their capabilities show afterwards, but when you're just starting off, especially you haven't worked with this person, you kind of have to be on faith that like, okay, this person will grow their potential and will do some incredible things. But then the other side of it is like, okay, how patient do I be? Mm-hmm. And I don't know how I balance that. I don't know if I have a good answer of how I balance that, but these are the things that I look out for.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's spot on. And like making sure when you go into that founder relationship, it's someone that you're, to your point, like willing to be somewhat patient with as they grow to their potential, fully understanding that you're also growing in your own potential. And hopefully you both can grow at the same rate. And I think that like that willingness to grow and learn at the same rate, I think it's something that's really important for founders. Because otherwise, if you have one person who's like running way ahead and the other person takes longer to catch up, I feel like that also builds the resentment.
But see, that's so tough, right? Like, it's like, relationships all over again. It's like no two people grow the exact same way or at the exact same pace. Like there's always deviances. So like, how do you reconcile what you just said?
That's true, but I think it's like learning how to appreciate what are the things that you're willing to be a little bit more patient on.
Right.
Are
you patient? Are you patient, do you think?
To a degree. To a degree. And it depends. Like there are I'm patient on things that I deem as like non-deal breakers.
Right.
But if it's something where it's like, no, like this is a deal breaker, like I'll give like executing against a goal where it's like, I might be able to, if I have an employee that I'm like, hey, you tell me how long you think this task is going to take to get done. And they tell me, and I give them like, no, I'm just like, you tell me what you think it's going to take so that I can plan. And if they estimate incorrectly once, I'm okay with that. If they consistently estimate incorrectly for months on end and have to constantly come back and reset their timeline, like that's an example of something that for me is a deal breaker.
Okay. I agree with you, but for a very different reason.
Okay. Tell me.
To me, that's about learning. Like to me, that's just them not learning from their mistakes.
Correct.
And that probably goes over other parts of life. Like, okay.
And that I'm not patient with.
Yeah, sorry, go again.
I said, and that's what I'm not patient with, which is just like, if you don't know, if you're in a corporate setting or even a startup setting and you don't know how you learn and you don't know how to self-assess and how to self-evaluate and how to recalibrate your communications and your own expectations of yourself, then to be able to communicate them to your boss or whatever it is, that's fine, but you're probably not going to work with me because I just like I need people to have like a level of self-awareness and a level of learning quickly.
Yeah. See, that's what I like the way I would have phrased the types of the deal breaker for me isn't about missing deadlines. It's about that fundamental thing. Like, how do you is about learning, like being able to learn new things quickly.
Yeah, you're right. And I think the deadline is like an example of a manifestation of
Right.
not
It's
being
the output.
exactly.
See, like, okay, nerdy Harry moment number 2 is, as we build these series, we're probably going to have hundreds of these. So at one point in time, I used to separate, actually, I still do. I'll show you my Notion and how I organize all my tasks.
Yeah.
I basically have tasks separated into like rational tasks and creative tasks. So rational tasks, I know exactly, because I've done some similar version of it in the past, where it's like, okay, I have to write this proposal or I have to put this deck together. And if I've done something similar, I know like how long that's going to take me.
Yeah.
And I've kind of have like almost like a clinical trial of all the tasks that I've done. And like based on that, I can estimate. But the creative tasks, aka stuff that I've never done before, or it's hard for me to judge, it's like I just give myself like 4-hour blocks of time to figure out.
Yeah.
And those I won't have like time estimates around. But based on that, I'm always like calibrating and adding to my repertoire based on the new tasks that I take on.
Yeah.
Eventually my creative task will become my rational task. And like, this is not possible, but like, ideally I minimize my creative task if I would just want to be a robot. Obviously I'm not. At least some people would. Thank you. I appreciate that. You should tell that to my wife sometimes. The second part of it is, yeah, like I'm genuinely interested by doing things that have never been done before. And that's like, I love to be that creative type. But yeah, anyway, that's how I sort of do my like time estimation. Do you have like a system like that, or do you do anything like that?
Not like as sophisticated as that. I would say, so I do keep like a daily diary or journal or whatever you want to call it, where I'll write down things and write down like what I did for the day and what my thoughts were, feelings were, and sometimes like what did I learn from it? Like what was unexpected about that thing or that day or whatever I'm writing about. But it's not as sophisticated as yours.
It's work in progress. I'm just proud of it because like it keeps me efficient and keeps me honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Nima from chat has asked about employees. What are some tips on delegation to give them ownership of their work for inspiration while keeping them on the same path as your vision? Like, how do you, I guess they're asking, how do you balance the two?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. Delegation is something I feel like as a founder, I've struggled a lot with, especially in the early days.
Right. Because you want to do everything. Like nobody else is going to do this right.
Yeah. And I was always like, it would be easier for me to just get it done quickly. And then you learn like you can't do everything. And even if you were to do everything quickly, there's still not enough time in the day. So tips on delegation. First is like my whole motto with this, and I'm curious yours, but it's like give people tasks to see how they do. So like I'll kind of start off if I don't know someone very well or I don't know how they work, I'll give them a few not easy tasks because I want to challenge them and see how they do in a more challenging setting, but I'll give them like a variety of tasks. Like maybe I'll give them like a really hard thing to contemplate and go figure out. And then I'll give them like 2, what I would deem like easier things that should be quick, to kind of get an understanding of how do they think and how do they tackle tasks. And then over time, as you kind of build that trust with someone and you start to understand their true strengths versus weaknesses for certain things, then you get better at being able to say, okay, I'm going to give this task to this person because they're really competent on XYZ. And I know that they're going to be able to excel in this task versus this other person who maybe is not as strong in that area. So I'm constantly like in the beginning trying to test for how does someone think and what what tasks are they good at? So I know I'm first delegating it to the right person. And then from there, making sure that I'm constantly giving feedback on that delegation.
Do you let them come to you for feedback, or are you constantly checking in?
It depends. There are some employees that just like want the feedback and come like ask for it straight up. And I tend to like that because it makes it less awkward for me. but I'm also pretty upfront about it. Like in my one-on-ones with people, something that I've developed and learned from one of my mentors, I start every one-on-one with a level set where I tell people, I say either you're meeting expectations, you're exceeding expectations, or you're underperforming my expectations. And I let that be like the first baseline from a feedback perspective. And then I'll have data to like back that up. Right. So if you're exceeding, this is why. These are the things that I value, that I appreciate that you're doing well. Keep up the good work. If you're meeting expectations, you're hitting your goals and you're, doing the things you said that you are setting out to do. And then if you're underperforming, typically there's some sort of like, you're not getting things done on your own timeline. You're not hitting your sales quota. You're not, whatever the metrics are for that person. And I can come with, these are the reasons why you're not performing. And these are the things that I think we can do about it. And those people who are struggling to even just like meet their expectation, or who fluctuate between underperforming and meet, like delegation is a really hard thing, giving those people a lot of responsibility because they can't even handle what's on their existing plate. So I try and get them to meeting and then hopefully exceeding as quickly as possible.
I'm genuinely curious about this because lately I've gone more cynical.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think people, well, I kind of know your answer because you wrote a book about a lot of this stuff. Do you believe that people can change? Like, how often have you seen people who are underperforming turn it around? Like, is it a slow change? Is it a gradual thing? Does it happen overnight? Are there triggers? Are there motive? Like, how do you think about that change?
So my general thought is that if someone's underperforming, they're probably not necessarily that they're bad, but they're probably just in the wrong role or like at the wrong stage of company. So I feel like I see this happen a lot where like there's someone, as an example, who's like really great, or let's just use like a general example. Like a lot of startup founders will be like, oh, I want to hire someone from Disney. And they're like, oh, I just hired this like VP from Disney at my 10-person company. And then that person like gets into their company and they're like, why isn't this person performing? And it's like, well, because they're like clearly in the wrong role at the wrong stage of company for what their skill set is, or for what they're willing to do. I see this happen a lot with sales too, right? Like a lot of founders will go out and they'll be like, okay, I've been doing all the sales myself. I need a sales leader to come in. And they go hire some like really experienced VP of sales. And then that person comes in and that person's like, well, I'm used to like managing a team and I'm used to having like regional sales reps and having a whole sales development team and all this other stuff. And then people are like, how come we're not hitting our numbers? And it's like, well, you've just hired the wrong person you've hired a fantastic person, but for the wrong stage of your company and for the wrong role. So I think people, I don't know, I guess that's kind of a cop out of an answer because I do think people can change, but I think more often than not, you'll have more success if you change the role that those people are in so that they can actually be doing something that they're interested in doing and empowered to do and can actually do correctly.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, it's also, yeah, and especially at startups, like, it's such an easy thing to do. It's like, I'm going to bring, chief product officer who's managed like a 25-person product team
Yeah.
And now you want them to lead like a 2-person engineering team.
Yeah.
I made that mistake, actually. I've made mistakes like that, where more so from like, I've hired academics into startup and kind of hoping that they would change. But yeah, still the same fundamental premise. It just wasn't the right environment and the right structure for.
Yeah.
Okay. Where to go with this next? I don't know. I have so many questions, but we've already talked about so many interesting things.
Okay, so I have a question.
Yeah, go. You go.
Okay. And I know your wife is watching, but I want to hear about your marriage. Like, I want to hear about what did you learn in work that prepared you for the commitment of marriage and prepared you for that new journey?
Well, I think, yeah, it's a good question. It's a really good question.
Or what did your wife teach you about relationships that translates to work? Because your wife is a baller. So I know that like she's keeping you in line over there. And
she keeps me humble.
Yeah. So I want to hear about that.
So I think 2 things. One, okay, I'll do the first thing first. I think a lot of the things that we were talking about even earlier this conversation about how you communicate, how do you set expectations, and how do you like align yourself towards the same mission and what you want to get done. Mm-hmm. That a lot of that translates over to relation, right? Like a personal, like marriage and just personal relationships in general, but especially marriage. And I feel very lucky because I practiced entrepreneurship and I had built multiple businesses and incubator programs and all that. So I've been in this environment enough where I had work wives or, equivalent of a work significant other.
Yeah.
So a lot of those learnings I could reapply, and I'm not making the mistakes I probably would have made, 10, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. What she's teaching me is probably a lot more interesting. I think I'm learning patience. Like I'm not like, while I come off as this patient person, I'm not patient. And like every time I'm like, I do something that I'm not supposed to. And like, I used to think I was very, very reflective as an example. Mm-hmm. Cause I meditate, I think deeply about stuff. But that was only for a very particular part of my life. Yeah. It was most of my work stuff, but I wasn't diversified. I wasn't a T when it came to that type of reflection in other parts of my life. So she really opened my eyes to be like, think about those things and become that T. I'm not there yet. And I'm working on it, but being that T. And then the second part is like, being more patient, not just with her and sort of what we have, but also with myself. Sometimes I have way too high expectations of myself because when you achieve success early, it's like you're constantly setting higher and higher expectations and used to meeting them over and over again. And when that doesn't happen, it's like, oh my God, that sucks. So I'd say those are the 2 things that I'm picking up.
Yeah, that's good. We all need someone to help keep us in line and keep our expectations from. I do that too. Like I'm constantly like, oh, I'm not doing enough. And then I'm like, hold on a second.
It also like puts things into perspective because we both work in different, like very different industries, but in using the same language. So she does L&D, leadership and development.
Okay.
Which like lines up with a lot of the stuff we're talking about here today, like just entrepreneurship stuff in general, but in a corporate environment versus like me in this super chaotic environment. So it's like, it also puts perspective about the corporate world, and she works specifically leadership and development of retail, which is, I know you know a lot about because you worked in that area for years and years. But to me, that was new. Because like my problem would be like, I can't believe I couldn't close this like, few $100,000 deal or whatever. Like I'm going through this, that, and the other thing. And it should be like, that's such a like first world problem. Like, look, there's people out there in retail who cannot get jobs right now and are like trying to get scraps for minimum wage. And that's really, really tough. So it's like, this is our tech culture in general. We kind of live in a bubble, and it also helps to get out of that. Like, and I think my friends also play a big part in that, not just my spouse. Because they come from all walks of life. Like my other closest friend, you haven't met him yet, Kai. He's in the military. So completely different life compared to us techies.
Yeah. Yeah, it's eye-opening because tech is such a different world. I just made the switch from, as weird as it is, from tech to a retail job. Granted, it's like corporate retail operations, but yeah, it's different. There's a lot of differences between tech and what I would consider the real world, which is like everything else. And tech is still the real world, but it's like such a bubble that.
Oh, it's so protected. Oh my God. I know so we've both been in Silicon Valley long enough to know like the economic disparity. It's crazy, right? Like you walk down, Market Street and you see like Twitter, and you walk, and there's like people who are making like 200, 300, 400, 500K. And then right outside are like probably dozens of like just like homeless people. And the crazy thing is they're desensitized to all of it.
Right. They're just like programmed. And I was this way for the longest time, and it's not good, but like programmed to just walk past it.
Yeah.
Which like we could have a whole nother hour-and-a-half conversation on society and, the ways that society should change, but that'll be another conversation.
Yeah, we should. Well, we were talking about so many interesting things. We didn't even get to that, and Grace is signaling me that we have about 10 minutes left. But so since you brought it up, give me like your quick unpopular opinions about society and what you don't like and what are the problems you're seeing these days.
My unpopular opinion is that I'll speak as like an American citizen, right? And my views are my own, but I think we do a really good job of like shoving things under the rug that we should be having thoughtful conversations around and really ideating on how do we solve this issue, right? Like income inequality continues to grow. And there are some people talking about it, but for the most part, you don't see a lot of people or corporations who have the power to do something about it, doing anything about it. Income inequality, access to education, access to food, literacy rates, reading capabilities in the United States, education in general, I think is not as great as it could be. And granted, we're both college dropouts, right? So I think there is a right way to do education and a wrong way to do education. But I think there are a lot of things that we just don't talk about as a society because it's perhaps hard to wrestle with the truth. And the truth is that we don't treat our brothers and sisters very well in a lot of cases, at least in this country, but I would also say in a lot of other parts throughout the world. And I understand I'm coming from like an extremely privileged place, right? Like I've had a lot of opportunity myself. And I just think that we can be doing more, myself included.
Yeah. I think the crux of it is like growing wealth inequality. And at some point, this was bound to happen because like it feels dystopian sometimes that we live in the world that we do and that we're protected, and yet people have completely different lives outside of our respective bubbles. Yeah. And I think it's everywhere, by the way. I think while inequality is growing both in Canada, US, also even places like India and China. And it's not talked about. And sometimes I do worry, like, at some point, because, you know, money is to a large extent artificial. We can talk about what I mean by that in a bit, or maybe even later. But like, at some point, people are going to catch on and realize that this disparity is not great for well-being of a society. And it seems that there's this big push, like call it inertia, call it political inertia, or call it economic inertia. That's hard to pull up, to change. And I still haven't put my finger on why exactly that is. There's a bunch of reasons. Like the simplest answer is like, there's no incentive structure that values this type of change. Like, for example, we could be in a government where like you could measure economic outputs of particular policies. And there could be similar to like how VCs have carry for the person who put that policy together. And that will incentivize good policy creation, hopefully. Mm-hmm. So one of the places, unlike technology that is constantly iterating, that hasn't iterated, is just government structures and policy creation. Mm-hmm. For the longest time, it's been the same process, like put up a policy, get votes on it by a group. And then depending on, I mean, there's variations of this depending on which part of the world you go to, but generally speaking, that's how policy making in a democracy works. Hmm. So I don't know. I don't have a great answer. I just know what we're doing right now is not sustainable.
Yeah. And not working for a lot of people.
Yeah. And especially in a place, you know, you're in New York, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where you probably get to see this in a much bigger way because there's less social security compared to a place like Canada.
Yeah, completely.
Okay. Amanda Clancy asks, yeah, we can go on about this stuff for hours, so probably good to get back to entrepreneurship. Amanda asks, when you were first starting out, was there any advice that was given to you that turned out to not be accurate? Was there any really good advice that really helped you or stayed with you throughout your career? That's a good question, huh?
Yeah. Any advice that turned out not to be accurate? I'm sure there was, but I've always been the type of.
You just forgot it then?
Because it was bad advice? Because it was bad advice and I probably didn't do it. There's nothing that like was advice, I think, that I took that ended up being like a end all be all for me. In the sense of like, I don't think that one piece of advice makes or breaks your company. I think like for entrepreneurship in particular, your success or failure is based off of lots of little decisions that you'll make over the course of months and years. So I don't know that I really remember one piece of advice that turned out not to be accurate. Any good advice? I mean, I read a book. Actually, the title of the book was like the only thing that I remember, but it was called Never Eat Alone. And that was probably the best advice that I got early on in my career, which was like, you have 3 meals a day, and that's 3 opportunities for you to eat a meal with someone and learn something new. And I like took that to heart as like an 18-year-old founder, where I literally tried to meet as many people as possible, try and take people out to breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that network from doing that, not being afraid to reach out to people, not being afraid to have conversations with people, that network was probably like, that was the best piece of advice I ever got, which was like 3 meals in a day, never eat alone. Because I don't know that it's ever been advice that has like made or broken my company, but the people that I've surrounded myself with and the people that I've brought into my company definitely have, have had the ability to make or break my company. And there were points at time where I hired people that broke it, and I had to right that wrong and then hire new people that would make it. And companies are a lot of that, basically.
So, okay, I have a hypothesis on why that is. Or not the hiring part, but why I don't think you remember any bad advice.
Okay.
I think you're one of those people that's really good at understanding people's biases when they're giving you advice. So you always have known how to calibrate that advice. Like every schmuck has an opinion about how you should be running your company.
That's true.
And sometimes entrepreneurs take what I call blind advice, which is like, you should run your marketing this way, without really understanding the why or what this person's experience is, or what have you. And I think in general, you were very good with that.
I appreciate
it. Yeah. No, I think it's true. So anyways, I think that part is important.
Yep. Completely. I also think kind of in parallel with that, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, Harry, but I feel like founders also have a really good way of disregarding the negative or the bad or the pain or whatever it is. Because like as a startup founder, like you go through a lot of things, you do a lot of things that are the wrong thing to do. You mess up in a lot of ways. And somehow you forget all of the bad things and move forward, and then tend to like have selection bias towards the good things that happened.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's just me, but
no, I think that's true. By the way, Grace is we're gonna close the stream pretty soon. Okay. So this is the last thing I'll say. I think you have to have that. You have to look at the positive side, because there's always negative things to look upon. And this is, I call it like relentless optimism. Mm-hmm. So even in the darkest moment, you can find the positive aspect, even if it's like learning. Like I remember one of our other trips, you had launched your pilot, mm-hmm. and it wasn't going well. Mm-hmm. And I asked you like, hey, like, Stacey, so how's the pilot coming along? And you're like, we're learning a lot of stuff. You could have easily said it's going terribly or whatever, but you're like, we're learning a lot. And that's the positive way of looking at it. So anyways, I think we should call it a wrap there. Thank you everyone who joined us at the STOA. We're hoping to do more of these where we bring in interesting guests like Stacey that are working on cool stuff, hold unconventional beliefs. We just made this focus around entrepreneurship because I know a lot of entrepreneurs are, in the audience or people that were interested in this type of stuff. But Stacey, thank you so much for coming out and being a part of our kickoff here. I'm sure you'll be invited on again and again.
Awesome. Look forward to it.